So I just finished a month-long trip to Europe, Italy mostly, and also a bit of time in southern France. And one thing going through my mind a lot of the time is just comparing Europe to North America. Like overall, which is better? And I've been to a lot of other European countries before. Like I've been to like Portugal, Spain, France, UK, Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Estonia, Poland, maybe a few more. But yeah, I've been to a lot of European countries. I've also been to the majority of US states and Canadian provinces. So I'd say I'm pretty familiar with both Europe and North America as a whole. Like I guess the only parts of Europe I haven't been to are Russia, like larger parts like Russia and kind of like the Balkans and Greece, like southeastern Europe. I would say other than those parts of Europe, I'm pretty familiar with the continent as a whole. And with the US, in Canada, like I've been to Eastern Canada, Western Canada, Eastern US, Western US, Southern US, Northern US. So I've been more or less all over, with the exceptions of like, yeah, I haven't been to Alaska or Hawaii. But yeah, I mean, I've been fairly all over US and Canada also. So I'd say overall, I'm in a position where I could compare North America and Europe in terms of my personal experience. So overall, I do prefer Europe, but I will say that there are pros and cons to each. So I'm going to go into first, like, where Europe is better than North America. Okay, I would say the biggest number one area in which Europe is just better overall is the fact that it's not completely like car dependent like North America is. You can walk places, you can take transit. The vast majority of the European continent has good public transit that's fairly reliable, fairly frequent, fairly fast, and that goes to most places. Like, yeah, you can't go to like literally every village. And I'm not saying Europeans never need to drive anywhere. Like, if you're going to like, national parks and stuff, like out in the wilderness, I think cars are often necessary in those cases. But if you're going to like any city or town above maybe 10, 20,000 people, for the most part, the trains will get you there. And if not the trains, then the buses. And the buses are often, again, more frequent than what we have in North America. But usually trains, like to be honest, I obviously prefer trains to buses. I think everyone does. Like buses are kind of, they're there for when the trains aren't there, but by and large, a train is always preferable to a bus. However, like on this trip, I think I only had to use buses like twice. Like to the town of San Gimignano in Italy and the town of Saint Paul de Vence in France. But most places the trains go to. And so, yeah, by and large, I mean, Europe has way better public transit. It's way more walkable than North America. North America is very car dependent, and it's hasn't necessarily always been that way because we had good railroads back in the 19th century, early 20th century, but it really became that way with the advent of car worship in the 1950s. And I think like that's when a lot of the streetcar lines and rail lines were torn up, or just the passenger rail was gotten rid of, but the freight trains still exist. So, I mean, I would say that's the biggest advantage of Europe over North America right there. Another thing, the second biggest, I would say, well, maybe the biggest, I don't know, but this one's a bit more inconsistent, is just the amount of historic architecture. Now, again, this really varies depending where in Europe you are, because there are some European countries that aren't that great for historic architecture. But I would say the ones that are good for it outnumber the ones that aren't. And overall, there's way more historic architecture in Europe than in North America. And it's partly because Europe's just older, but it's also partly because so much of our historic architecture in North America was destroyed for the sake of the automobile, like for the sake of building parking lots and freeways and wider roads for the sake of catering toward automobile traffic. Like a lot of our downtowns were completely eviscerated. And again, like, I mean, were these downtowns ever the equal of a city like Rome or Paris or Vienna in terms of how beautiful they were? No, they weren't. But at the same time, it sucks that this happened. I mean, are any of our cities in North America, in terms of their historic architectural beauty, this on the level of the great European cities? I mean, I think New Orleans probably comes the closest. It has some very beautiful architecture, but at the same time, New Orleans also has a very high crime rate. So, like, I can understand why some people are reluctant to go there. I went there also this year. Nothing happened to me, but at the same, aside from a couple guys trying to tell me where I got them shoes, yeah, I'm not falling for that one. But at the same time, it's like I get it why people would want to avoid it for that reason. But yeah, overall, Europe has more historic architecture, and its best historic architecture is more on a higher level than ours is, with a few exceptions. But yeah, I mean, that's a big thing in Europe's favor. Another huge thing in Europe's favor is one thing for that really benefits you if you're living there is they're less workaholic. You get more vacation time. You don't have to work as long hours. Generally speaking, like it's not as ridiculous in that regard. There's more respect for things like break time and like lunch breaks or whatever, and they treat you a bit more like a human being in the workplace there. So I think that's a huge benefit of living in Europe compared to North America. Like every country in Europe gets 4 or 5 weeks vacation time, with the exception of the Ukraine, which gives you 3 weeks vacation. And I don't know if that applies now, given that they're all being drafted into the army now. Do they still get their 3 weeks vacation from that? I don't know. I mean, you kind of also have to be alive to take your 3 weeks vacation. But yeah, I mean, okay, when I'm talking about Europe, I'm not really talking about like the Ukraine. I'm talking about like, countries that are have a higher standard of living than there. Like again, like that's one thing I really have to qualify about Europe is like I'm making these generalizations. I'm not trying to talk about like every European country. I'm trying to talk like on average, especially Western Europe, but even some of the more developed Eastern European countries like Czech Republic, Slovenia, Estonia, Slovakia, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Croatia, Hungary. A lot of these things would apply to those countries too. It's just when you get further east, it does get a bit dodgy, and some of the better things don't necessarily apply to those countries. At the same time, not all the good things apply to every Western European country either, right? Like Germany, the cities there are hideous and lacking in historic architecture, unfortunately, like the bigger cities. So that would be one respect in which Germany is one of the lesser European countries. So again, it really depends which country you're in. But again, like it depends which state you're in too, or whether you're in Canada, the US for a lot of things here. But yeah, by and large, as I was saying, like Europe has better workers' rights. There's more of a respect for them as human beings. So I'd say that's a positive in Europe. Another positive in Europe is frankly there's less obesity and people are just healthier for the most part in general. I say for the most part because there is one big unhealthy thing about Europe, and I'm gonna get into that when I talk about the flip side, the negatives of Europe and positives of North America. But for the most part, Europeans are healthier. Like they're less obese. They live longer on average in most countries. I think it's partly because of laws about food ingredients there, and also because they walk more and they don't just drive everywhere like we do. Um, they're generally healthier and more fit. Also, they don't have food allergies as much as we do, and I think that's interesting, and I don't know the reason for that, and I think more research is needed on that. Because one thing about me is, like, I do have a food allergy, and when I'm in Europe, like, it does get a bit tricky to navigate it sometimes because they put the types of foods that I'm allergic to in their food more. Like, it's certain types of nuts. Um, Not all, but certain types. And it's like that is something that's less common in North America because we have a lot more people with food allergies, like nut allergies and stuff like that. So like it really raises the question, like, why are these food allergies so much more common over here? What are we doing wrong that is resulting in this happening? And how can we emulate Europe so everyone doesn't get born with food allergies? I actually have a hypothesis that food allergies might ultimately be what wipes out the human race, because at the current rate of food allergies increasing, are we eventually just going to become allergic to like everything? I mean, it's really scary when you think about it. But I digress. But yeah, that is something where I would say Europe's better. They're just healthier in general when it comes to what they eat. Lack of obesity, and yeah, for some reason, lack of food allergies compared to us. I would say another respect in which Europe's better is it's more interesting on a cultural level because there's so many countries with so many actually unironically in the literal sense of the word diverse cultures. And when I say diverse cultures, I'm not talking about like the newly arrived, you know, non-European groups. I'm talking about the native cultures themselves. Like there's a lot of cultural diversity, like actual cultural diversity, and that is something that Europe is very rich and very strong in. Here in North America, it's like, I mean, historically, like 95% of it is English speaking, and then you got Quebec and some of the neighboring regions of Canada, like certain parts of New Brunswick and Ontario. But other than that, it's pretty much English everywhere, with the exception of, I mean, some regions of the US in the far south have always had a strong Spanish speaking population, but that has increased a lot lately because of Mexican and other Latin American immigration. But again, like, I mean, that is its own issue that I mean, but like regardless of that, it's like, I mean, what I'm trying to say is the diversity in Europe is a diversity that has always existed, and it's not something that's just being forced upon them as part of like forced mass migration. It's just that they've always had actual cultural diversity in an organic way, as opposed to like importing people from every corner of the globe, which doesn't result in actual diversity. What it results in is a hodgepodge of just randomness where everyone kind of gets blended into nothing, like combining every type of cereal into one bowl and it tastes like nothing. But I mean, in Europe, there's actual cultural diversity. You have countries as dissimilar as Italy and Austria existing side by side and having unique cultures, you know, like it's like Italy and Austria are very different culturally in a lot of ways, but yet they exist side by side peacefully, and you know, they have for many years. Or take like, you know, Austria and Slovenia, or France and Italy, or say France and Germany. Like you have these very different countries that exist side by side and have existed side by side for centuries, sometimes more peacefully than at other times, but nonetheless, that is a strong aspect of Europe, that diversity that they have, the actual diversity. And finally, one thing I'm going to have to mention is a very small thing, but to me very significant. They don't give you those huge fucking uncomfortable pillows in Europe at hotel rooms the same way they do in North America. I do not know why North American hotels think those gigantic, awful pillows are comfortable. They're not. They're terrible. They make my neck feel sore the next morning from trying to sleep on one of those damn things. So the hotel pillows are better in Europe. Anyway, the flip side, the areas where North America is better and Europe is worse, they do exist. And I think overall Europe is better, but I'm gonna have to get into the areas where North America is better. Okay. Firstly, we do have a lot more untouched natural wilderness. I mean, they have some in Europe, but not quite as much as we do. And I mean, it's kind of the flip side though, because it's a bit of a catch-22, because having more natural wilderness also means that like parts of our continent are very sprawled out as a result. And it's also like, in Europe, you do have it being more densely populated in parts also means, I guess, more of a heritage of human civilization, like a stronger civilized human heritage. So it's like there's a bit of a give and take there. But I mean, at the same time, we do have more, I think, rugged wilderness than they do. They have some like in the Alps and in Scandinavia, but I think we have more overall. However, again, that's a bit debatable. I'll say that's a bit debatable because, I mean, Europe does have mountainous areas too and beautiful wilderness. I just think we have a bit more that's like kind of untouched wilderness where it's like you can look as far as the eye can see and not see any sign of human civilization. Now, again, is that a good thing or bad thing? Like, I mean, you have in Europe mountains with beautiful villages near them. Is that better than untouched wilderness? Or I don't know. But it's kind of like, again, like maybe sometimes you want one, sometimes you want the other. And I'm saying if what you really want is like totally untouched wilderness with like not really any sign of human civilization nearby, North America probably does have more of that overall. Another thing I do prefer North America, which is sort of flip side. Oh shit! One thing I forgot about Europe that's better. I'm gonna say huge thing. More independent restaurants, fewer chain ones. That is a huge thing. It feels so much better to be able to like not have to encounter chain restaurants constantly everywhere you go. If it just feels so much more authentic. So yeah, that's another thing in favor of Europe. But anyway, sorry. Getting back to in favor of North America. Okay, Europe. When I was talking about how we're more healthy how Europe is more healthy overall, there is one big exception, which is cigarettes. Okay, Europe has a big problem. Too many people smoke too many cigarettes there, and it can be a bit annoying sometimes, like smelling cigarette smoke in a lot of places, and also sometimes I feel like their smoking laws aren't as strictly enforced or aren't as strict there when it comes to like smoking indoors or in places like train stations or bus stops, stuff like that. Like places that are sort of like ambiguous in terms of whether they are considered indoors or outdoors. In North America, they usually err on the side of like not allowing smoking in those places, whereas in Europe they're a bit more lenient about it. I don't think they should be. I think laws on smoking in public places, I like them being more strict because I don't like having to encounter cigarette smoke everywhere I go. It's gross. It smells. It's unhealthy. Like, I'm not saying tobacco should be banned totally. I don't think there is any country in the world where smoking cigarettes is totally banned, but I do think erring on the side of being stricter with that is better. And that is an area where I think, yeah, overall North America probably is stricter than Europe on that. So yeah, I'm gonna say we're better on that issue. Another area where we're better is free speech, frankly. Like a lot of Europe has stricter laws on like what you can and can't say. And I'm not saying I believe in unlimited free speech, but I mean, I do think that there's more censorship there on a legal level. A lot of our censorship is on a private level, which is bad, but at the same time, at least you can't go to prison over it. I mean, Canada technically does have hate speech laws and like Holocaust denial laws, but I don't think they're as strictly enforced here as they are in many European countries. And on top of that, some European countries even have laws. Like in France, there's a law that you can't insult the head of state. I forget if it's the prime minister, the president, or both. I think they have a prime minister and a president there. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but you cannot insult the head of state in France. Like that's actually a law there. Um, and that stupid fucking Freedom House organization doesn't even recognize that as like a negative. They're like, oh, we give France an 100 out of 100 for freedom, even though they have a law that like you can't insult the head of state. So like, yeah, okay, free speech is an area where I'm going to say North America has an advantage over Europe. Like sometimes in Europe, I noticed like I would try to access certain websites and I actually wouldn't be like, it would say like, this website is banned by the government of Italy. Like you cannot access this website in Italy. Like certain right-wing websites. And I was actually surprised by that. So yeah, that would be an area where North America is better. Another area where better, I think Europeans sometimes go too far with the petty nationalism. Like sometimes like hating their neighboring country. Like it just gets a bit excessive at times. And it's like, I do think they need to understand that we do have more in common than we have dividing us. And I really think sometimes the hatred for neighboring countries can get a bit too strong at times, and maybe they should chill a bit with that shit. So, I mean, it's not as bad now as it was in previous, well, it kind of is in Eastern Europe, because there are actual wars that still go on there over this kind of thing. But by and large, okay, I will say like it's a tough tightrope to walk between too much petty nationalism versus like Europe becoming America, where it's like everybody just mixes together. Like I don't want Europeans to be put in a Euro blender, but I also don't want them to like bomb each other and destroy each other over perceived differences or injustices or whatever. So, I mean, it is a very tough tightrope to walk, but I do think sometimes Europeans do go too far on the petty nationalist side of that tightrope. So that is an issue that I have with them. The other three issues I have with Europe, these are mostly like convenience related issues. And again, I ultimately think that beauty matters more than comfort. I do think that like this obsession with comfort and convenience is partly what's ruining North America, because it's like they will cause so much destruction just so they can have a slightly bigger house or slightly bigger car or whatever. And I think the obsession with comfort is not a good thing. But that being said, sometimes I think Europeans can go a bit far in the opposite direction, where it's like, okay, I don't think comfort should ever be the number one thing, but I think occasionally it's like they go a bit far in the opposite direction. So, okay, air conditioning. Yeah, a lot of places in Europe just don't have air conditioning. And I think that, like, okay, I get that it can be difficult to install it on historic buildings, but even some of the newer ones don't have it, even a lot of the newer ones, even in some of the warmer countries. And even in historic buildings, like, it is possible. And frankly, like, the cost of installing air conditioning in historic buildings is much less than the cost of subsidizing endless suburbia like we have here. And it's like, frankly, I do think that this is something they could invest in a bit more. Like, I mean, their taxes are pretty high, so it's like, why not put some of that money toward improving air conditioning across Europe? Because this shit can kill you, you know? Like, I mean, not having air conditioning when it gets to like 35 Celsius, 40 Celsius in the summer, especially during the increasing heat waves we've been having lately, that shit can actually kill you. Especially if you're old or have any kind of like disability or whatever. Like, that shit is not good for your health. Like, I do think air conditioning, like, okay, people here overuse it sometimes, like when they blast it when they're like not even at home, and that is wasteful. It's also just wasteful the size of the homes people live in here. That's the main differentiating factor. But again, in Europe, they're less wasteful to begin with, so it's like having air conditioning, I do think would improve a lot of places, because it's like it's not good for your health to like be in like super fucking hot weather for long periods of time with no climate control. Like, it is good having air conditioning in those cases. So I will say, like, I get it that it's like it's hard, but it's not impossible to like retrofit these historic buildings with air conditioning. And it's not just historic buildings, like a lot of the newer ones don't have it either. So like I will say that is something that I do have a problem with in Europe. I'm not sure about heating there because I haven't been to Europe much in the colder months. I'll say that personally, like, lack of air conditioning bothers me more than lack of heating. That could be just because I'm Canadian and I can tolerate cold in some ways more than heat. But I don't know. Again, like, having some form of climate control, I think, is a good thing, because people, it can be deadly, like being in a really hot room, or I guess a really cold room too. So yeah, that would be an issue that I have with Europe. And again, it would actually be less wasteful of energy there because they live in smaller homes on average to begin with compared to what we live in here. So that's one thing. Another thing is like the bathrooms. Oh my gosh. Okay, Europe does not do bathrooms well. I will say, like, for starters, the fact that you have to pay to use many of them, and they require exact change, and that even despite the fact you have to pay, they're still often lacking like toilet paper and soap and paper towels. They're functioning air dryers, and they're often still dirty. It's like, okay, like, and there's no toilet seat often on the toilets. Like, what is up with that? Yeah, I'm sorry, Europe sucks where bathrooms are concerned. Do better. Seriously, do better there. Just do better. Okay, so the final thing where I think North America is better is okay, Europe, in much of Europe, especially Southern Europe, I think they have some weird like hours for like businesses and restaurants and stuff. And again, I get it that like it is good that they treat their employees well and that they don't make them work like 24 hours a day. Like, I don't believe you do have the right to like buy anything you want at like 3 a.m. or like eat anywhere you want at 3 a.m. Like, I think this culture of 24-hour convenience is like very harmful toward employees. It doesn't even treat them like human beings. But at the same time, it's like, okay, I don't believe things should be like constantly open. I don't believe they should have like ridiculously long hours, because employees are human beings too. But at the same time, to me, the hours they choose sometimes don't make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense that like in Italy, you cannot get dinner at many places between 5 and 7 p.m. To me, that's like prime time dinner time. But in many places, they're like, no, you have to get dinner after 7 p.m. And it's like, that's not even healthy, because it's like you're encouraging people to like stay up really late. And it's honestly better to get to sleep a bit earlier. And you're not getting to sleep early if you're eating dinner, starting dinner at like 7 p.m. and like finishing at like 7:45, and then you're not getting to sleep till late in that case, because like, I mean, if you're having dinner that late, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, why can't they, like, if they want to close for a bit between lunch and dinner, why not open for dinner at like 5 p.m. and then close a bit earlier? Like, when they have it open for dinner from like 7 p.m. till like 10 or 11, it's like, that's just, I personally think that doesn't make sense. So yeah, those would be my pet peeves about Europe. But again, like, as I've said, overall, I think Europe's a lot better than North America. I think there's probably more that we could learn from them than they can learn from us. And I think much of what we could learn from them are things that we knew ourselves in the past, but we kind of forgot in the 1950s in this frenzy of automobile worship and suburbia worship. And again, there's certain problems that I haven't gotten into because they exist both in North America and Europe. like the problems of like political correctness and like forced political correctness of all forms. It's like, again, these are problems in both North America and Europe, and you can't really call one better than the other in this regard because both are frankly terrible for it these days. But like the only thing related to that, I did give North America more credit for free speech. But I also give Europe more credit for having more preserved architecture and more. I think overall culturally, its cultural heritage, not just the architecture, but in other regards, is still more well preserved. Whereas in North America, we're kind of patient zero of globalism in some ways, and it really does show like how much our local cultures have been subordinated for this like generic globalist American culture. So I will say, like, where all that stuff is concerned, there are certain problems that are both like the issues of like, you know, demographic change and discriminate, like sort of like widespread and antipathy toward white men and things like that. Like these are problems that are ubiquitous in both North America and Europe, and I can't really say one's better than the other in those regards. So that's why I've kind of left that out of this analysis, because I think it's sort of a common problem in both places, and neither is inherently better or worse for it. I mean, it might depend on the specific region, but overall, I'd say neither is inherently better or worse in those regards. But yeah, that said, I think those are the pros and cons of North America and Europe compared to each other. Overall, I think Europe is better, depending on the country. But I'd say overall, I think Europe is better, and I think we could learn a lot from them. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that.